All right. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to The Big Questions. This is a series we do in order to delve into some sticky, some thorny, some difficult issues that present themselves to us. I'm here with Liz Ditty and Jay Kim, who are part of our teaching team. And also, we are going to be delving into probably one of the thorniest issues that's faced us in 2020, which is the issue of politics and faith. It was probably one of the more contentious elections that we've had, at least in my lifetime. The rhetoric was ratcheted all the way up to 10, and then people took it to a 12. I mean, it was disorienting to be a Christian. There were some Christians who said, if you vote this way, you're betraying Christ. And others said, no. If you vote this way, you're betraying Christ. So in the middle of that, Westgate kind of wrote a position paper in which we tried to navigate as a staff and elders the idea of politics and faith, and that's available. That's on our website. We'll put a link here in the comments and the description, so you can read that for yourselves. But we just wanted to open this up and have a conversation. But before we even get into that, I think we need to talk about why we needed to write this paper. This paper was an attempt to be a service and a help to the people here. So, Jay, you want to talk about the impetus behind the feeling we needed to write this?
Yeah, I mean, so much of it is what you've already said, Dave. We are living through a time in which political strife is it's been ramped up in really unique ways, in ways that feel unfamiliar to me. I mean, political tension has always been a reality, but the depth and intensity of the tension feels new, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. And one of the things that really feels new about it is that, you know, Christians have always wrestled with the intersection between their faith and politics. I think that's always been true, but the ways in which that intersection is now sort of ripping us apart. And by us, I don't just mean our nation. I mean specifically Christians, followers of Jesus, you know, and that's really new. So in many ways, this paper was a helpful way for me, not as just a pastor, but as a Christian, to try to at least begin to put some language around the ways we can posture ourselves when we begin to think about and engage politics as followers of Jesus. And you know, the thought that's been sort of ruminating in me in the last several weeks is I am always in a rush to sort of resolve something and put a period at the end of the sentence and then move on. Just realizing when it comes to the issue of faith and politics, I think this is a first word in a long ongoing conversation. There are so many, some things are very simple, but there are also so many complexities on the ground that more than anything, I want to try to posture myself as a learner, you know, while maintaining fidelity and faithfulness to the way of Jesus as best as I can. So that's why we put the paper together as a first word to give us a framework for at least beginning to think about engaging politics as Christians.
I think one of the things it's pretty clear, and Liz and I were talking about this before we even started recording, is that this paper is probably going to be disappointing to people on both sides of the political spectrum. As we get into this, it's pretty clear that there is a group of Christians who feel acutely that their core beliefs are not held by the majority population. And because of that, they feel like the culture in general is hostile to their core beliefs of who they are. And so there's a sense in which this group kind of feels as though they need a strong man to stand up for what feels to be a threat to their belief system. Now, that threat actually probably is not actually a threat in terms of religious liberty. The Supreme Court has protected religious speech again and again and again, but there's cultural things that are going on that make them feel besieged. And so there's folks who are saying we need to take a stand. And then on the other side of the spectrum, perhaps there's other folks who say, listen, what we saw this summer was so egregious. The injustice was so pronounced, the wickedness so out there, that we need to actually be a church who actively declares whose side we're on this. And we need to take a stand and not just say things, but actually work toward real justice. And both sides probably are going to be a little disappointed in this paper because we don't name names or, outline issues like that. It's just more of a framework for how we're trying to deal with that. Let's talk about that for a second, because that tension is real, not just in American Christianity, but probably right here in the Bay Area.
Yeah, and I think when you say what we saw this last summer, what you mean is what we had our attention drawn to this last summer, that we have continued to see since then, and was a problem long before then, of racial injustice and racial violence.
Right. That these moments, or codified moments of national attention, drawing attention to a historical issue.
Right, and while Westgate has made some comments and obviously condemned a number of actions on Sunday mornings and offered prayer and support and stood with a number of people, it's very rare for Westgate to make stands on anything that's political. I feel like, even in our talks with each other, I'm often trying to be very studied in my words to stay as neutral as possible. And that seems to be the culture of the leadership of our church. So for people who wish that we would take more of a stand on things, what do you say about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great thought. What I can't speak for the entire leadership of Westgate Church right now. I'll just speak for myself. I don't take politics lightly. And I take it seriously. And I take it seriously not because I believe politics will save us, but because I am almost certain politics will fail us, and am almost certain that there is no saving coming our way except by way of the one true king of the world. Now, that does not mean that politics are unimportant. It means that politics walk the fine line of being idolatrous when we're not careful. And that's why I take it seriously. I actually have seen in the last several years, especially, I think this has always been true, but at least for me in my experience, politics has become an idol for so many people in general, and for so many Christians, it has become an idol. Yeah. Christopher Wright, in his book "Here Are Your Gods," he has this fantastic line. He says, "In the tattered remnants of Christendom that still survive in the Western world, the monosyllable God still tends to mean in the popular mind or imagination, God as presumed within the Christian heritage of Western civilization." And then he says, so this is why God turns up in public speech. In God we trust, God bless America, God save the Queen, all of that kind of stuff. I think that's so interesting, because when we say things like God bless America, we don't really care too much to ask the question, what do we mean by God? We just want to know whatever that God is, blessing better be coming our way. And if
and
that blessing
defined by us, usually materially.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And the most physical, tangible way we see ourselves being able to squeeze out the juice of blessing as much as possible, I think, is by way of politics. And so we've conflated politics with this mentality that God is supposed to bless us. And so it's become this really, really destructive idol, to be honest. Which is why I think, like you said, Dave, the paper is going to be disappointing to people on various sides, because the paper is not intended to confront very specific issues. The paper is intended to give us a framework for following Jesus faithfully, and then seeing politics through that lens, which actually, subtly enough, is a confrontation to the idolatry of politics. So it's a paper on faith and politics, but it's an indictment on a sort of, and I'll just say this very strongly because I believe this is true, not for all, but for many, a sort of wicked allegiance, a deal with the devil, if you will, that so many Christians have made with politics. What I mean by that is the belief that a political savior will lead us home, and he or she will not ever, you know, no matter who. So
I would absolutely say that, Jay, because I don't know that it's necessarily just blessing that people are looking for. Like, the way you hear people talk, it really is life or death. We are becoming either a totalitarian dictatorship, or we are becoming a communist society. And in either case, like, religious freedom is at stake. The lives of unborn babies are at stake. It is life or death, as to whether or not Christians will be able to continue to worship freely, to all of those things. I think it's beyond freedom. It is, or beyond blessing. It's like freedom and liberty.
Let's stay there, and I'm going to come back and ask you a question, Liz, about what you've seen, because about the tension, about the ripping apart, if you've seen that in your friend groups, in the small groups, in the Christian groups. But what you just mentioned was what David French called Flight 93 rhetoric. And I love this because in Flight 93, if you recall, on 9/11, it was the plane that went down in the field in Pennsylvania. And the idea is that the plane's going to go down, so we have to use any tactic, including incredible violence, to make sure that doesn't happen. And it's justified because the plane's going down either way. And this is what David French says is super dangerous. And it gets really icky when it comes down to, like, if this candidate or this policy gets enacted, the church is going to fail. It's going to be hurt. It's going to be destroyed. That's, like, theologically not even possible. Like, there's all sort. That's just, the church is not just historically survived more, but theologically, Jesus even says to Peter, like, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell aren't even going to prevail against it. So there's some real ickiness to that language, that can really, I think, reveal where we're putting our trust. Have you guys seen that kind of rhetoric there?
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. I think that, I mean, there's a lot there. So one of the things I will say is, I want to couch what I'm about to say with this first. I do think that political engagement, in so much as it doesn't compromise behavior to a point where you are behaving outside of the way of Jesus. For example, enacting violence. That's not the way of Jesus.
Right.
To harm, whether physically or verbally, which that's a whole other thing. We are violent toward one another with our words because we have these tools that allow us to safely speak in disgusting ways to each other from behind these digital screens. And so not just non-Christians, but Christians speak such vile things to each other. Well, that's not the way of Jesus. And so anyways, for example, as one example of violence, but in so much as we can engage politically as followers of Jesus, without compromising our following of Jesus, I think that we should, so when you talk about defending the lives of the unborn, or when you talk about, what sort of galvanized this past summer with defending the lives of people of color, all of that stuff matters because those are all justice issues tied into the Imago Dei, right? That God has created human beings in his image. And that whether the human is in a womb or whether the human has skin color that is different than yours, as a follower of Jesus, you are called, without compromising the way of Jesus, you are called to engage as deeply as possible in defense of all of those lives. So that matters. But what you are saying is such an important distinction. We cannot believe that that victory can only be achieved by way of enacting political power. In fact, throughout history, the times faith has thrived the most are the times when we have been, by we I mean Christians, have been oppressed the most. And so, for example, by the way, I am not saying like, who cares what laws are enacted? Again, let's, within the boundaries of the way of Jesus, let's engage as much as we can to make a difference politically and otherwise. Mm-hmm. But let's just say things go as badly and horrifically as some people fear that they will in our country. Let's just say that's where we're headed. What does that mean? Does that mean at the end of the day, Jesus actually loses? Does it mean that God's kingdom actually doesn't come? Or does it mean that the church gets squashed and pillaged and is burnt up forever and there is no more church, there is no more Christianity? Well, history tells us the reverse is true. That if the laws are changed and Christians in America are persecuted, historically speaking, what we could project is that the church would actually thrive under those circumstances. So again, I'm not saying that to say like, don't engage politically as a follower of Jesus. Certainly do. I think it's our responsibility, but this whole
or that you're wishing for persecution. That's absurd, right?
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Right. You're just saying, like, if it happens, like Jesus is really big and he's really powerful and he's shown himself to be faithful to his people.
Yeah.
One of the things we talk about all the time, Liz, this is a question for you, is 640 discipleship, becoming like Jesus. How have you seen politics rip people away from the way of Jesus? What have you seen, like, because you're also into spiritual formation. That's one of the things you do. You do spiritual formation. You're excellent at it. You've written books on it. So what have you seen in terms of the formation of human souls? And what have you seen that gives you, I guess, concern? Or maybe alarm? Maybe alarm's too strong a word. Maybe concern is a better word.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to say anything that anyone else hasn't said before, and it's hard to pinpoint or even separate politics and pandemic at this point, right? Yeah. Like we're so intertwined. But I think with pandemic, a lot of us have been drawn into either complete isolation or into very small circles of people, which we've talked before that closeness, proximity breeds empathy, and distance breeds suspicion, right? And so it's one thing when you're at work or you're in different environments where you're talking with people who you respect and who think differently than you, and like they have good points about different things, or you can see how, because you know their personal story, you can see how they would come at things from there's so many ways where like our connections with people who are different than us or think different than us have been changed, or we've been distanced physically from each other. I think like that's really harsh. Also, the amount of time that people are spending online consuming content I think has gotten really, really high. And it's not just any content, like, even you can tell what people are clicking on and what they're consuming by what is on every single news page. And whatever news page you go to, wherever you read on the spectrum, it is either politics or pandemic on every front page. Like there are some human rights issues that are going on around the world, but other like for our national government, it's politics or pandemic. And one of the things that Ezra Klein talks about is how easy it is to get sucked into these national narratives and get sucked away from our local community narratives. So that's, I think, another thing that's happening with both politics and pandemic playing off of each other, is we're getting sucked out of the news of our own city and our own area, and we're getting sucked into these like big national things. And the big national things we actually have far less control over. We have far less understanding of the complexities and the things that are at play. The things where we actually could be contributing or helping are most likely at our local level, within our school district, within our town, within our community of the people who are shut in and whatnot. When I think about like the best example that I can think of Christians being involved in politics, I think about International Justice Mission and the way that they take their work on justice and human trafficking, and they lobby and they talk to politicians and they work with law enforcement and they work with the FBI and they work with lawmakers and educate them, and are like really like making a difference. For us to engage in politics that way, to thoughtfully look at where a difference can be made and make investments in that, and and put our own time and our own energy and our own sweat on the line to go serve people, or to make a difference within the system. A lot of that is at the local level, and a lot of that costs us. But for us to just like pledge our allegiance somewhere and throw a rant about something, it doesn't cost us, and it doesn't really do anything. So that to say, I think formationally we've been taken away from our communities. And where we can be connected and make a difference and have good conversations and develop empathy. And we've been drawn into these like national debates that are really hard for us to even know how to engage in. And then we've also just then been consuming a lot of information, a lot of it from very biased sources, one end or the other, and we're consuming this information without knowing how to engage with it or how to use it, and then that consumption of news and is absolutely formationally affecting our brains and our spirits.
Let me just to back up that, I'm going to share my screen real quick. I want to show you guys a picture. This is from John Mark Comer. Jay, you'll be familiar with this. This is the idea of spiritual formation, which is that we are shaped by the stories we believe, the habits, and then the relationships. And that all has to do with the environment. The reason I bring that up is, Liz, what you're talking about is a disconnect from relationships, right? The stories that we believe, these narratives, those are now being dominated by news, and whether you're left or right on the spectrum, doesn't matter, the dominance of that. And then that actually is affecting our habits, and that shapes and forms us as humans, because Jesus wants to be the one who implants in and says to us and tells us his stories, right? Implants is not the right word. But gets into us those, and that his community, his relationship,
faster than a Bill Gates vaccine microchip.
Okay. See, I don't know if we can make that joke yet. That might be too soon, Liz. But the point is that you're making a point that the input of news, plus the disconnect from these kind of relationships where we can have honest dialogue, is really hurting us right now in 2020, or hurt us in 2020.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Jay, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's exactly right. The thing I think about is, the famous Neil Postman book from the
Oh,
80s. Its title is so appropriate. We're amusing ourselves to death. And we don't think about it as entertainment because we think it's real. I mean, it is real, but the way it's packaged and produced and presented to us
yeah.
is to entertain us, So all media, news media outlets, their primary goal is not so much to get you the most accurate. I mean, they're going to tell you that's their goal.
It's
And
not.
that may be a goal, but their primary goal is to make money.
Get
And
clicks, right?
the way they make money is to keep your eyes glued, to hold your attention.
Yeah.
And they'll do whatever they've got to do to hold your attention, So that's why there's the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, like on news stories. It's like the gorier and the more violent and the more crazy and angry and whatever, you're going to see it because it'll keep you glued. So I just think, the ingestion of the information. A friend of mine named Brett McCracken, he's gonna release a book this month in a few days called The Wisdom Pyramid. And it's this thing he's been working on for several years. And I would highly recommend it, not to give him a plug. I mean, although I'm plugging him, because he essentially talks about how we shape and form wisdom in our lives.
Yeah.
If it's a pyramid, like a food pyramid, the foundational levels need to be scripture and experience with God and quiet time and life in the community of Jesus and the teachings of Jesus. And then up top, like the sweet stuff, the dessert stuff is like a little internet, a little media, a little bit of social media, whatever. But we reverse the order, Christians included. Most of our diet, as Liz is saying, is like Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, what's here, and then a sprinkling of Bible every now and then, mostly out of guilt. And so it's no wonder why we're spiritually, emotionally so out of whack. It's like eating cotton candy 3 times a day and mixing in some broccoli, once a week or something.
I will go on record to say that cotton candy and broccoli are delicious together. I'm kidding. Well, Liz, you were going to jump in and say something it sounded like.
Oh yeah. What was that?
Sorry, I didn't mean for you to be able to do that.
No, that's okay. I think I was just gonna say that I know it's been trendy to do like social media fasts. And not even just trendy. I did a social media fast and I haven't gone back yet. I actually have really enjoyed not having that be a part of my routine right now. Yeah. That said, I have replaced it with reading the news. I know that a number of other people have it. And it's hard because you do want to stay informed. Like, you don't want to tell people, don't look at the news. You do want to stay informed intelligently. And also, like the news actually feels like it affects us. Like, is the vaccine coming out? Is it working? Right. Like, when are we going to get back to normal? When are we going to get back to, when are schools going to open? When are, like we have like some pressing questions that we're sort of looking for hints as to like how that's going to play out. And so, but I think that it's really important to be mindful of, kind of what you were just saying, Jay, as far as like what place on the pyramid it has. Like, is it the first thing you look at in the morning? Yeah. Is how long are you? And most of our phones will tell us, how much screen time we've had and what it's been devoted to. And so I think noticing that, and if too much of it is going to social or the news, like we might just notice, we might not even realize how much it's affecting our anxiety or our perspective of other people.
One more thing I want to get into before we leave, and that is, it feels, no, it doesn't feel it. There's all sorts of articles on this. Truth has taken a big hit in 2020. objective reality and facts. And when I was growing up in the 90s, people would say things like, hey, listen, you got to be real careful of relativism. Relativism is when you don't listen to objective truth and you just make stuff up that you want to be true. And that's the danger. And who knew that relativism would encroach everywhere, including the church? This month's Christianity Today, the lead article this week, I just clicked on it, was about how do pastors, how do church leaders talk to people about conspiracy theories that are baseless. That's an extreme example, but I think in general there is a sense in which we need to be we need to talk about truth, and it feels really interesting because this goes to wisdom, which is Brett McCracken's point, right? The idea that how do you get to wisdom, how do you get to truth, and the ancients and the Jews say it's communal. That there is safety in the wisdom of a community, and as autonomous individuals, I'm hearing people say that's not true. I'm the final arbiter of truth, and all of you are wrong. So how do we as a Christian community get to truth in a world of misinformation and chaotic distrust?
I do think people find communities that reinforce their ideas of truth. For sure, they build up communities around them that reinforce those things. I don't think that it's necessarily all individuals.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree.
You mean like echo chambers, Liz? You're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right,
Yeah.
but that I would argue that that's not exactly what the communal wisdom seeking is referring to.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I mean, yeah, you know, I would just say, some of it is linguistic limitations, in that when we talk about truth, particularly in a post-enlightenment world, we 99.9% of the time when you say the word truth, what people are talking about is objective data. That's what people mean, right? So is something true in a post-enlightenment world is a question that you're asking the question, does it weigh as much as you said it weighs? Is it as tall or as short as you said it is? Or, you know what I'm saying? It's like all measurable stuff.
I mean, I wish you wouldn't have brought up weight in the time of COVID, but go ahead.
And that is truth. That's not truth. But we have to remember, again, this is where like our allegiances get so wacky. There is another deeper, more ultimate truth. When Jesus talks about truth, he doesn't say, this is a tool you use to know what is true and what is false, or here's the formula or the equation you use to measure what is true or what is false. He doesn't say that. He personifies truth. He like literally personifies truth. He says, I am the truth, the way, and the life. And Jesus is not static. He's a person. He's dynamic. He's God, and he's spirit. He's all those things, right? And I don't think in the late modern Western mind we have categories. I don't think we have categories for understanding truth as a dynamic, personified reality. We only think of truth as static, fixed, objective data points. Mm-hmm. And those things are not untrue. That is true. It's scientifically true. And I think that matters. Truth matters. But again, for the Christian, when you ask the question, what is true? The primary question you have to ask is not, is this point of data true and is this point of data untrue, and which is truer than the other? I mean, that stuff is important. But I think the most important thing is, again, truth personified is Jesus himself. And so if we are going to see ourselves and the world truthfully, We have to see ourselves in the world through Jesus, who is the truth. And I'm not saying let's not do the hard work of figuring out if that data point is accurate or not. I think those things are really important, and listen, if there are people watching this, and I'm certain that there are, who are like, well, actually, guys, I do question the vaccine, for example, or I do sort of think that there might be credence to this theory or that theory, call it a conspiracy or not. Like, I'm not here to argue that one way or the other. And I mean, we could talk about it. I have my own personal opinions, but the thing that really, really is concerning to me is that those quests for truth are almost always void of Jesus. Like, we don't, and the reason that matters is because on the journey toward truth, or on the quest for truth or true things, we so often act so unlike Jesus. Like, we talk and we engage and we interact and we critique and criticize and make fun of in ways that are so unlike Jesus. And here's the deal: when Christians act that way, it doesn't matter if you found a data point that is objectively true, you're living outside of actual truth. Like,
because you're not following the humility path of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think anyone who's ever done serious work with data and like large amounts of data knows that how you pull data, what you look at, the boundaries that you put around it are going to change the way that you interpret it drastically. And I think one of the things that we have to come to grips with is that we just don't have access to the data that we really want, and even the graphs and some of the things that we might see or that are floating around, like the way that they came to that data and the way that they are displaying that data, it can really change the interpretation. But I think one of the things that you said, like, really struck me, Jay, is that, that truth is embodied in Jesus, that Jesus personifies truth. And I think that that's one of the biggest things, is that the truth is part of the identity of Jesus. And if our identity is going to be in Christ, it's going to be in that truth. But if I think one of the reasons why many people are closed to or skeptical or find it difficult to change their minds about some of the information that they have or that they see is because their identity is in something else, right? And so to change their mind about that, like, I'm sure we've all been in Facebook conversations like this, right? Where, someone puts up a map or puts up a chart or puts up something and you're like, that's like, that doesn't make sense, or, whatever. But you can't actually even have a conversation with them about whether or not the data is bounded and true, because for them to say that doesn't make sense, or for them to change their mind about whether or not that is real, it would affect not only their sense of self, but even their relationships with the people around them. It would affect the people who respect them. It would affect their position in sort of the social world that they've created. It affects too much. There's like too much at stake when your identity is bound up in one point of view or another, that you can't change your mind or open yourself to truth. I think that's one of the critical things about being rooted in Christ, is that you can say, like, maybe I voted for this person, but I also see that this person has a case, or, I like some of the issues that, theoretically this political spectrum has a monopoly on social justice, but this has a monopoly on, whatever. Then you can say, like, yeah, I identify as this, but I care about Black Lives Matter, or however, like whichever way you want to cross over from one end to the other, you can have your identity rooted in Christ in a way that you can be open to the truth that's on both sides, because no one is completely right or completely wrong. And so I think being able to change your mind, being able to accept truth when you see it, like that's some of the wisdom that we can have as Christians when we're not bound to a political identity.
Yeah, one of the things and there's people that disagree with me, but right now I'm in the middle of the seminary, and Liz, you are too, Jay. You've been through these. You actually teach some of these cohorts, Jay. But these cohorts are meant to get people together in a room who are serious about Scripture from wildly different backgrounds. And so I'm interacting with people from different tribes of Christianity with different thought processes, whether it's Mennonite brethren to the Black church in Chicago, to more charismatic folks out of Oral Roberts University. I mean, to the Calvary Chapel in Southern California. All these different kind of streams of Christian thought. And one of the things I'm realizing is sitting, asking questions, and really listening to other people allows me to get to truth. And that's why I think the first premise in the paper is humility. Out of that, it's one of the first ideas is humility. Esau Macaulay wrote the book Reading While Black. He's basically, and there was a Christianity Today book of the year, he's saying, look, Black folk have Black theologians have something to say that's different than what you might have read. This stream of Christian thought is worth paying attention to. There's real wisdom here. And that book was so influential to so many people this year because it's the idea of we're a community of saints listen to each other. And Liz, you talked about this. We're disconnected because of COVID. We're separated. And, I don't know Esau personally, but the idea is that coming together as a community is a way to get to truth. I just believe that to my core. Coming together as a community is a way to get to truth. And if you refuse to do that, I think it shows a lack of humility. I think it shows a lack of the way of Christ. And I'm not saying I'm right. I'm saying that together we have a much better shot at being right and getting right and following Jesus. And I think that's critical. And that's part of what 2020, I think, might have stripped from us, or it revealed how deeply, in my opinion, how deeply we need it.
Yeah, and I love what you're saying. It's not only just coming together as community, it's coming together as community and listening to and honoring voices and stories that are from a very different perspective than maybe the traditional stream.
Yeah. Yeah, I think listening and reading and speaking broadly, conversing broadly is really important. And I think there's a natural fear for some people, and it's in some ways it's justified. There's a fear like, well, how broadly, Jay? Like, when do I know that I'm not stepping outside the bounds of
orthodoxy? Yeah.
And then if somebody says, well, like these things pertaining to sexuality, or these things pertaining to politics, or these things, this is outside and inside of the boundaries, then the second question is like, well, who says? Like, who are you to say? How do I know? And so maybe it's just safer for me to sit in my little comfort zone. This is where I think something you guys have already talked about quite a bit already. This is where the community of Jesus matters so much.
Yeah.
It's where finding a community and embedding yourself in that community and learning to live in the midst of the tensions that community faces, that's why it matters so much.
Yeah.
Liz, in your book, you shared your story, and you shared with me personally of growing up in a very cult-like environment, in a Christian cult. And one of the psychological effects of that, this better than I do, is the way they control you is to utterly limit your scope of ideas, essentially, the ideas you can engage. Because if they can limit the ideas, they can keep you boxed into a static position that's very controllable. You're never going to change. But never going to change means never going to grow. And never going to grow means you're dead. Things that don't grow are dead.
Right.
By their nature, they're dead things. And I think formation into Christ-likeness demands growth. And I want to be careful here. By growth, I do not mean constant evolution of your theological position. There is Christian orthodoxy. But Christian orthodoxy, I believe, is best learned and embodied and lived out within the context of a living, breathing organism known as the church. As you embed yourself in a church that is trying their best to be as faithful to the way of Jesus as possible. And I think good Christian engagement with politics is possible from that place, not because you are surrounded by people who sit on the exact same position as you on the political spectrum, but because you are surrounded by people who don't. And I think that's what makes it transformative, that you learn to follow Jesus faithfully in the midst of difference, right? To borrow the words of our friend Scott McKnight, the Christian church is a fellowship of
difference. Yeah.
You know, and
not difference. Yeah. Different people. We are different people. Yeah. Well, guys, again, this is probably the second word. Jay, you like to say, this is not the last word, this is the first word. That's what you say all the time. So this is like the second word, and we're looking forward to the third and fourth. And as we gather together, both in small groups and life groups and over coffee shop, as if we digested this. And I know that just personally for me, Jay, Liz, your guys' brains and theological heart and knowledge in deciphering this past year, which was like, it felt like every day. Like one day I woke up and remember when the sky was orange? Remember that?
Yeah.
When we were on Mars? Every day I was like, you guys have been so helpful just as friends and as community to help me process this. Jay, there's been times when you're like, I think you're overreacting. Liz, you're like, yeah, you haven't thought about this, have you? And I'm like, no, I haven't. The perspectives you guys have brought me into so much richness and to understand and to mitigate my own wild brain. And I think that's the beauty of community. I think that's what Westgate is about. I'm super excited about finally getting back together in person and hopefully over coffee and over, well, for me, food. I'm very big fan of that. But thank you guys for engaging this. Thank you for your conversations. Thank you for your contributions. And we look forward to plowing on ahead into 2021. It won't be easy, but if we're together with Jesus, we'll make it. So thank you guys.
Cool.
Yeah.